Yeah, we are live now.
Well, hello and welcome, everybody.
Hello. Not many people have joined right now, I guess, because of the short notice, but we'll wait a couple of minutes for more people to join. As you know, yeah, see, the first person who gets a notification when I go live is me,
Yeah,
which is weird because from my personal account, I'm just subscribed to Al Muqaddimah. I don't even watch any videos from my personal account, but I still get a notification every single time.
yeah. Have you considered turning them off? Don't know.
I should do that now, actually. Yeah.
I gotta,
Thank you for the advice. I'll do that now.
because I did do that with my channel because I would upload a video and then immediately my phone would go off, my computer would, I get like 100 emails suddenly going like, Eastern Roman History has uploaded his new video. And I'd be like, yes, I know.
Yeah. Also, your notifications on like Discord and stuff, I always know when you upload a new video because of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, some people are. Stormwind is here.
Mm.
She's just an easygoing woman trying to make her way through the internet. Um, so yeah, medievalist. Hello from Canada. Hi, I'm also in Canada.
Excellent.
So Daniel, we'll talk about it because I have a couple of things like topics that I've prepared. We can
Yeah,
talk about them, and then we can also take questions in between.
of course. That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. So yeah, before we were talking about how intimidated I feel when I have to make a video about the Byzantine Empire, or something that talks about them.
Mm.
It was always it's always intimidating because people who know about Byzantium and Eastern Roman history, they know a lot about history, and they're always correcting me on things because I tend to it's kind of a flaw of mine, but the things that I don't consider important to the video, I tend to sort of generalize them
Yeah.
and just move on.
I
Uh,
mean, I do understand that because as someone because of the huge scope of Byzantine history,
Mhm.
where you're dealing with over 1100 years of history, I can't be an expert in the history of Armenia, the Islamic Caliphate, the Huns, the Goths, England, France, Russia, um, the Mongols. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a bit unreal. I think it is. If I was writing a book about these, like a specific period, then sure. But for a video where you're doing a deep dive, maybe just gloss over something which is related, but you don't really need to go into every last detail about it, then
mhm.
yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
absolutely fine.
But I'm always being corrected on things because I only learned Byzantine history because of like its relations with Islam. I only know
Mm,
the most detail I know about Byzantium is Eastern Roman Empire is that the theme of Sicily was created in like 700 or 695 or so because of Islamic incursions.
yeah.
But yeah, always people are always pointing it, and I always feel a little intimidated by that. See, already we have people telling us that Byzantine Empire is Rome. Uh,
Oh,
so
I, I can't. If I'd be a rich man if I was to count the number of times that someone's written either it's not Roman, it's Byzantine, it's not Byzantine, it's Greek, or it's like it's the Greeks were Romans. That's like come
yeah,
on.
in my
Like
video,
some of these, it just it's like it's quite complicated because and I think it's beyond most people's ideas of what makes up a person in some ways because this we're dealing with an empire. So regardless of whether you are Armenian or Sardinian or Syriac or a Latin or a Greek, you were still a Roman citizen, which is quite different to how we do things today, where we've got nation states, where by and large, most people born in somewhere like Korea are probably going to be Korean. They're not going to be, oh, they're the Korean part of this larger polity of empire. So they may be Korean, but they've got Mongol citizenship or something like that, if you
Mhm.
like. I think the Austrian empire is a good comparison because you've got Slavs, Austrian, Germans, Hungarians, but you would still call them Austrian in terms of their citizenship, roughly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess that debate is sort of still.
It's a bit different, but it's more comparative to somewhere like that
Mhm.
than a nation state.
Yeah. Yeah, still, every time I generally, I actually have no problem calling it Eastern Roman history. I just do it to annoy Stormwind. In my last video, he even pointed it out. He said that you did to annoy me, and I said, yeah, because in my last video, I mentioned that Egypt had been ruled first by the Roman Empire and then the Byzantine Empire. I
Hmm.
specifically, and I got a lot of comments about that. People telling me, "Oh no, it's just Eastern Roman because you were just talking about the same empire." I said, "Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, I actually agree with that, but I just do it to annoy a friend."
I mean, you're right, but also it's kind of you're it's two different scopes because if you're dealing with the Roman Empire in a more academic sense, or like you're probably thinking more about people like Caesar and Cicero
Mhm.
and Hadrian and stuff like that, rather than like, oh yes, the famous Roman Emperor Nicephorus the First,
Yeah.
which I do understand. So, I, yeah, I think it's so long as you understand the difference, um, I think that's all that's needed necessarily.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. It does actually like feel weird to call it the Roman Empire when yeah, everything there is in Greek. So it does feel weird. I mean, if that's the way, then we have to also call the Ottoman Empire Third Rome, and so uh, go from
Well,
there.
I would dispute that, but
Okay,
maybe.
I actually did watch Premodernist's video on it. I'm very ready for that debate, but let's not do that. Somebody
Mm.
mentioned my cup. Yes, this is it says Pakistan's, if not world's, leading Islamic historian. Sometimes in the morning you need someone to support you and remind you, make you arrogant, and that's what this cup does for me.
Hmm. It's important to have a motivator in one's life.
Yes, exactly. And in the morning, I'm drinking tea, and I just the problem is that the other person knows it. I don't. On my side, I just see a logo. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm. Well,
So
you
Hikmah,
mentioned topics, so do you want to fire the first broadside in terms of
sure.
history?
First of all, Hikmah History is here. He's saying that you shouldn't be doing live streams with mediocre channels like Fatima. Why are
Ah,
you up? It's like 9:31 here. Why are you up? For my first question to Hikmah is, you need to
it's
be slick.
Hikmah history.
Yeah, I mean, last time when we were doing a stream, he told me, "Oh no, we'll do it at 11." I was like, none of our audience is gonna be up at 11. It's fine, it's cool, but still, now today he's up at
Hmm.
9:30.
I have had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Hikmah history, and
You have?
I have, yes,
That's awesome.
yeah,
In
I was
London.
in London,
Mhm.
and
Yeah, he's like 100 kilometers from here, 200 kilometers from here in Seattle. I've asked him to at least come to the border. We can meet each other. There's not like a fence or something, but nope,
yeah.
he just doesn't do that.
Well, it's always worth a try.
Yeah. I mean, it would be funny him standing in the U.S., I'm standing in Canada, and just meeting like that. So
Yes, two men divided by two countries
yeah, the two countries in a
and
visa.
2 feet apart. Yeah.
I think he can actually. I don't know if, but he has a British passport, so he can just enter Canada. But nope, he doesn't want to do that.
Mm.
Yeah, why would he do that for a friend? Um. So, do you see any questions you want to take?
Uh, so, friend, I haven't been looking too hard. Let's see. Let's have a look back up. Any thoughts on the Islamic depictions of Heraclius in Islamic literature? This may be a question more for you, Sarwish. The
Uh,
idea that we wanted to be Muslim but didn't want to go against the empire's tradition. Pass.
I
In
will
terms
say
of
that
what
I
that
don't
means.
think that that's true. I really don't. But there is something interesting about Heraclius. Um, some early Muslim literature actually paints him as quite handsome. Like it's funny that they were always talking about how good looking he is.
That's interesting because when he became emperor, he would have been roughly in his mid to late 30s. And so by the time Muhammad dies and Islam appears on the scene, Heraclius would have been in his late 50s, possibly. So
And
it may be an impression not based on reality, but it may be things like coins and stuff, because
yeah,
for
because
most people, coins would be
Mhm.
what the idea they get of who's in charge.
Yeah.
And there's actually quite a lot of evidence for this. So like in the revolt of the usurper Procopius in the 4th century AD,
Mhm.
he, the historian Ammianus Marcellinus, tells us that he started circulating golden coins of his portrait into the Balkans to try and persuade Roman regiments to join his cause.
Mhm.
So there would have been quite a lot of importance put on the circulation of coinage as a way for rulers to
Mhm.
show what they look like.
I mean, that's the entire point of coins, right? To
Hmm.
uh, basically reinforce the fact that you're ruling people. But also, I don't know if any Muslim actually met Heraclius. Do you? There's some anecdotes. There's particularly one from the reign of Muawiyah, but I'm pretty sure when did Heraclius die?
641 AD.
Yeah, so
So
he was okay.
he
So he
was
was
long dead since when Muawiyah
ah.
rose to power.
It's interesting because I remember as a child in reading in an Islamic book, it was not. I didn't do research, and the story is almost certainly not true. But there was a story about Muawiyah in his olden days. He was annoyed by the fact that churches in Damascus used to ring their bells, and he wanted to like just do something about the Christians. So there is something of a story like that, but I'm not sure it's true.
Is that the story relating to Jerusalem, where I think it's Muawiyah? He decides to rebuild the temple, and um, I can't remember the exact details, but
I
um, there's something to do with churches in that. I'd have to look it up. I can't remember off the top of my head.
I
I
think
think
that was.
that may be what you're thinking about, possibly.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But I think that was Abdul Malik when what you're talking about. I'm not sure, but I think that was Abdul Malik.
Okay. Oh,
Uh,
this is where my knowledge of the Islamic Caliphate's history is a mere shadow compared to Silish.
so I mean, I don't have any that much of a Byzantine knowledge of Eastern Roman history, so that's like, yeah, we're gonna have to work on questions that work together, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, so the first topic that I wanted to discuss was so in like by 640, Muslims had taken over Syria and pretty much closed by let's say 650, Muslims had pretty much closed the chapter of expansion into Byzantine territory, right? So at that point, what was like the reaction of the Byzantine Empire to the whole thing, and what were they doing in relation to that?
That is a really good question. So I will answer this in 2 or 3 parts,
Mhm.
if you don't mind. The first part is the sort of political military reaction. Uh, so from the 630s to the the big peace treaty is 661, where the caliphate falls into civil war between Ali and Muawiyah, and that's where the Eastern Roman Empire gets a longer break for, well, most of the 660s. There is no fighting between the two empires, but there is a peace treaty from 651 to 4 as well, I think, or just for a year. Sorry, I was remembering facts off the top of my head. So throughout that period from the 640s to 630s, 640s, and 650s, you've got quite a lot that happens. So Heraclius is getting old, and he, after the Battle of Yarmouk, pulls his armies back into Egypt and Anatolia from Syria. And you have to remember that the Eastern Roman Empire has only had a few years to try and recover after a nearly 2.5 decade long war with Persia. And one might even go so far as to call it a total war, if you can call it that, because the resources of both empires were put to their absolute limits into trying to win this. And the result was a status quo with the Sassanid Persian Empire falling into civil war, which didn't help, and the Eastern Roman Empire did manage to have peace and start to sort things out. But also, you've got a religious controversy spring up over
you there, Daniel? Okay. Seems something happened to his internet. Okay, like I have no idea what happened. Can everybody still see me, or is there a problem on my side? But let me check if my internet is working.
I'm still here. Aha, there we are.
What happened?
I don't know. Maybe it was a blip. Mine was still connected.
I think mine was connected too. No idea what happened.
That's really odd. I haven't got anything else on, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my internet is pretty good at the moment because I use it alone, so it's usually fine. So,
well, let's note it down as an anomaly and move on. So, where was I? Oh, yeah. So, basically, the Byzantines are on a two-front war for over a decade between Egypt and Anatolia, and you've got the Caliphate are raiding into Anatolia, and they're getting as far as Amorian and burning everything in their path. And in Egypt, one of the other factors which is an issue is that there's a political crisis in Constantinople where Heraclius dies, and then his son, who's got tuberculosis, also dies after a few months. And then he's replaced by his stepmother / cousin Martina and her son Heraclonus, and she's not very popular. And there's a palace coup where Constans II is made emperor. And then in 644, there's another coup where Valentine, who's the general that puts him on the throne, tries to seize the throne for himself and is murdered by a mob. And then the emperor, who's about 14, takes direct control of the empire. So you've got 4 years of political chaos, in which time Egypt basically has to fend for itself, and the patriarch and the local general have to try and make decisions and deal with what's going on. And we've got quite a good idea of what happened there because John of Niku wrote a near contemporary chronicle where he details the exact movements of this campaign. So the loss of Egypt is a really big blow, and one of Constans II's first acts as sole ruler is to try and retake Egypt, which was initially successful, but the general in charge, after booting out the Arab commander, then started wasting his time looting the local countryside, which didn't help. And then the Arabs come back the following year and drive out the Romans. So
In Egypt?
in Egypt, this is the 640s.
Uh-huh.
And then after that, the Arabs push westward across Libya and start attacking Byzantine Africa. And also they're pushing into Anatolia. And also they're starting to build fleets and starting to raid the coast. And this is where Cyprus is lost.
651.
Yeah. And then the crescendo moment for this, where the Byzantines are just being pushed back slowly, but being pushed back on all fronts. Like they also lose control of Armenia as well. Is the Battle of the Masts, which I won't go into the nitty-gritty of it, but Constans loses the battle. This is a big naval battle, and it's possible that Muawiyah actually sails up to Constantinople and raids the local area and then sails back. But then when he sails back, there's the first fitna. I think it's 661.
That's 661. But he, when was the Battle of Mass? 657? 658?
Something. I think it's been redated a couple of times, which doesn't help. I would say 660 or 661, but quite a lot of these 7th century dates move.
Yeah.
Depends which source you read, unfortunately.
They keep moving and changing, and new events keep showing up all the time.
Yeah, there's in the last decade there was a big revision of the first siege of Constantinople, which I mentioned in our collaboration video. Which, I do intend to do a video about talking about the big problem with the traditional account. But anyway, so as far as we're aware, Constans doesn't have much room to maneuver before this point, but once he gets some breathing room, he ends up doing quite a lot. So he's also got several rebellions going on which don't help. So we have quite a lot of coin finds for his reign. So he's minting lots of coins, but the value of them is steadily going down. So which tells us that Constans was running short of precious metals, which gives some justification for why he ends up pillaging lots of bronze and stuff from Rome when he visits the West. He starts introducing a system called the apothecai, which are warehouses, which historians believe are places where soldiers could, this comes into our part 2 of sort of administrative and military changes, where soldiers could buy local equipment or be distributed local equipment produced from the local area to help keep resourcing the army. And this comes into another big debate about military lands, which I won't go into. But one of the theories is that, which I believe, or I agree with, is that Constans, to help pay for the army and offload the cost from the state, half pays for soldiers by giving them lands for them to work to earn money, as well as the wage they get from the state, and also can use that to pay for themselves and buy their equipment. And this is focused around a household. So if a soldier is obligated to fight and their name's on a military roll, which is held by the state, and if they can't fight, then their son or their wife will pay money to what they should be doing. So the state is generating soldiers and money from this to help pay for all of this. Constans also, there's a small line in the Book of the Popes, which talks about he goes and campaigns in the Balkans to push out the Slavs, because most of the Balkans has fallen. And so there's an account which describes Thessalonica, which is the big city of Macedonia, that it's a island, a Roman island in a Slavic sea, which should paint an idea of the Balkans at this time, that you have these islands of Roman territory and major city centers like Corinth, Athens, and Thessalonica, and Constantinople, and then almost everything outside of that area is held by the Slavs. So Constans campaigns along the Greek coast, and then he moves westward, and he campaigns against the Lombards, who are in Italy, because the Eastern Roman Empire still has major territories in the west, which often get forgot about by the Romans themselves. And so he institutes lots of administrative changes there as well. So there's something, the Book of Pontiffs talks about him introducing a census and introducing taxes, and we believe this is where he builds the new professional navy of the Roman Empire to challenge the rise of the Islamic navy, and also introduces his warehouse system into the local area as well.
Didn't he move to Sicily as well?
He did. He visits Rome, and then after that he moves to Syracuse, and that becomes his capital for the rest of his life. He's murdered 6 years after doing that. And he leaves his son Constantine in Constantinople. So you've got two emperors on both ends of the empire, so there's a lot of strategic thinking in the latter half of his reign. And he also manages to retake quite a few of the lands which he lost during the 650s. So like he gets back, I think this is where the condominium over Cyprus comes from. And he also manages to get Armenia back, and a few other bits. But so there's a steadying of the line, and then you get to the big issue of after the first fitna, then the caliphate comes back, and you have the first siege of Constantinople, and Constantine IV spends the first half of his reign again on this big fight for survival. So all of that happens, and there's definitely a struggle for resources, because the coinage gets smaller and smaller and devalued. And then there's also a strange instance where we've got lots of coin finds for Constans II, and then there's a big dip in terms of finds and that lasts for a couple of centuries. So it's possible that there's less money in the actual circulation. So there seems to be a greater reliance on payments in kind, on banking systems like credit and debt and debiting and so forth, which could have been conducted on sort of promissory notes and stuff like that, rather than actual money. Because the main money we have from this period, or after Constans II, is gold coins. And my university tutor described it as having an economy of £50 notes. And buying a loaf of bread with a £50 note when you can't get change is quite difficult. So how does the economy function after that? It must have some sort of combination of in-kind and complicated and or advanced banking involved. So something like that. Yeah. So I hope I've managed to describe several of the factors involved.
There was a question here. Was it this one? I don't remember. It was something about the Persians and the Byzantines. But anyhow, I actually wanted to address this. Muslims believed that in the 630s, Islamic leaders did believe that the Byzantine Empire had become corrupt. And Muslims had more respect, or at least like a sense of kinship with the Romans.
Mm.
Um, I guess you can say that they were rooting for the Romans during the Persian War, the 25-year war with the Persians, and they were rooting for. And there's even a chapter in the Quran called the Romans, and it talks about like Muslims. A lot of Muslim scholars believe that it actually predicts when Persia took over Egypt, Rome, and then Rome took it back. There's a, according to many scholars, the chapter actually predicts the fact that the Romans will come back and they will take Egypt back from the Persians. So Muslims certainly saw a sort of kinship with them, but when Muslims fought them, then they felt that that this empire had become corrupt. It had become, this reliance on icons and the Trinity and all that good stuff sort of really made Muslims be alienated from them and started seeing them not as real Christians. So yeah, that was the idea behind that.
Mm. If I might add, from a Byzantine point of view, there was a major shock in terms of their worldview where, well, they just lost 2/3 of their empire to a people that for ever in their sense of time had never really amounted to anything. So, um, and also the threat of total destruction is very real in this period. And so
Mhm.
it's unsurprising that you get um, there's several apocalyptic texts which are written at this time. One's by Pseudo Methodius, uh, and there's an Edessene uh, uh, apocalyptic text from Edessa, which talk about the end of the world, and they're talking about how the Roman Emperor will fight a major war, and then after that the Judgment Day will happen and stuff like that. And there's probably a good reason why these things come out of this period. Um, and religion is um, religious disputes happen a lot in this period. So
Mhm.
there's a great determination to try and solve uh, lots of Christological issues. So you've got two ecumenical councils in the 7th century, and you've got the introduction of monothelitism by Heraclius as well, and that's maintained by Constans II, um, who ends up arresting the Pope because of it. Uh, so, from the Byzantine point of view, there's this genuine idea that this is the end of the world, and the way they explain this is that God is punishing them for sinning in some regard, and so um, eventually, this sort of comes out in the 8th century, where you've got the introduction of iconoclasm, where the the reason for why they've had all these defeats, and especially in that 20-year period from 695 to 717, is nearly the destruction of the empire. And so they're going, okay, what are we doing wrong, which has incurred God's wrath? We're idolaters because we're worshipping uh, idols as if they're gods. This is against the Old Testament, and let's stop that, which is a very simple way of putting the iconoclast controversy. But yeah, it is, and it's probably no coincidence that the Islamic Caliphate is also having these sorts of theological debates at this time, or roughly this time as well.
Yeah, I mean, Islam was sort of new, and so it was coming together in itself. But I imagine the Byzantine Empire kind of had the same response that Islam had at the time of the Mongol invasions. At that time, we see, and again later with colonial rule, we see this sort of an idea that we have been sinning and we have strayed too far away from the real Islam, and we got to
Mm.
go back. So the Wahhabi movement is born in the modern era, not exactly as a result of colonial rule, but there is some connection with that. And one of their like big progenitors, or their spiritual forefather is Ibn Taymiyyah, who was writing in response to the Mongol invasion. So there's a connection between the two, and that's so I imagine the Byzantine Empire also had a similar reaction to the whole thing, and they saw this. Um, I mean, from the Islamic perspective, when I study it, it's different. But I think from the Byzantine point of view, it's kind of like the rise of Islam is kind of like the Mongol invasions. Like you got these
Mm.
nomads coming from the desert who nobody cared about in most of history before that point, and then all of a sudden they come in and they take over like 2/3 of the empire and just
Yeah.
so I think that was sort of like that.
And it's not a new topos either of the, oh, we are corrupt and we must do something about it. It's like if you read the preface of Livy, who's a Roman historian from the um, end of the Roman Republic, beginning of the empire, sort of first century BC AD, um, he's talking about his preface like, I'm going to be talking about the deeds of our great ancestors, because the Roman Republic slash Empire today is corrupt and in need of cleansing religiously, stuff like that. So it's it. I think it's beyond just a Islamic or Christian thing. It's more of a
Hmm.
generally religious thing that people like to look back or be self-reflective and go, we are doing something wrong. We're doing something which is erring from the true path, and um, it, we should be inspired by when things were done properly, if you like.
Yeah, that was the same. I think that's a sort of a universal way of looking at things. When something huge like that happens, people always question what happened, why did we lose God's favor? So yeah, I mean, I
Hmm.
can imagine that. So there was a question here that I was really interested in, but I've forgotten what it was. Oh yeah, Stolman's question: were the emperors and caliphs of the 8th century multilingual? Of the 8th century caliphs, I cannot, well, not multilingual in that you'd be interested in, they couldn't speak Greek or stuff. Of the 8th century, who was in the 8th century that would be multilingual? I think one of the Umayyads could speak Greek. I'm not sure. I know for a fact that one of the later Abbasid caliphs, it was either Al Muqtadi or Al Muqtadir, who could speak Greek because his mother was Greek.
Hmm.
Um, but in between that, I don't know how many of them could speak Greek. Do you know of any
In
emperors that
terms of Roman emperors, um, I, I think except for some of the earlier ones in that century, like Tiberius the Third or Leo the Third, all of them were born in Constantinople, and Irene of Athens was, of course, from Greece, so she, of course, spoke Greek. So I don't think um, there's no one that I don't recall reading anything that says that Leo the Khazar or Constantine the Sixth could speak another language. It's not mentioned, but because Leo the Third was um, he was uh, Syriac or from Syria, and so came from quite a different background. He may have been multilingual, and Tiberius the Third is he, is he like I think he's like a I think Tiberius Absamar is sort of like a descendant of a Gothic or German emigre or something. So he may have, being from the provinces, he may have spoken a different language, but I don't think so. Especially like all the purple-born emperors probably
Mhm.
wouldn't have been multilingual or had an interpreter to do that.
Uh, so that reminds me of an interesting thing that I read a couple of days ago. When Muslims raided Crete and Sicily during Muawiyah's reign, not reign, he was not even caliph at the time, he was just the governor of Syria. Uh, sorry, I got distracted by a question. He actually sold some of the Byzantine Christian artifacts to India. Somebody in India bought them from him. It's very fascinating because we have an account of it going to Basra in Iraq and then being shipped off to India. But I don't know much about, like, I would really love to read more. I don't know if you know about anything about this topic, but the sale of artifacts in the medieval times is quite a fascinating topic.
I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I do know the Romans had trade with India for hundreds of years,
Mhm.
going back to the first century AD and even beyond then. Um, and there's a brilliant account by a guy called from the 6th century, so this the empire of Justinian, by a guy called Cosmos Indicoplistes. I butchered his name, but well, Indicoplistes is sort of part of his name because it's the man from India or something like that. Because he was a merchant who eventually retired and became a monk, but who went and traveled to India. And his book, the Christian topography, is sort of like a geography of the world and also trying to understand it in a Christian context. Um, and his is a work that um, and let's try that sentence again. There's a great passage in it about a Roman merchant that goes to a prince in India, and
Mhm.
a Persian merchant also goes to the same prince, and both of them are offering him uh, merchandise to trade. And the Indian prince decides he will um, decide to choose whichever trader to trade with if he can show them a picture of their ruler. And the Sasanian gives him a silver coin of the Persian king of kings, and the Roman gives him a gold solidus of the emperor. And the Indian prince really likes this gold solidus and goes, "I will trade with you." And he gets mounted on a elephant and is shown around this his court and kingdom, and the Persian prince is just sort of shunted off. Traders shunted off to one side, told to go away, and yeah, that's it's a fun little story.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not like a medieval or ancient Indian account unless there's an elephant.
yeah, yeah, and elephants are great. It's how the stuff gets sold in your 6th century monastic workshop.
Exactly.
But
Uh,
yeah,
so when Mehmed II took Constantinople, he called himself Roman Caesar or Kaisar Rum. Did he have legitimate grounds to call himself Emperor of the Romans?
damn.
Uh,
Isn't this the question we were hoping to avoid this time?
yeah, I just wanted to say that actually, the Ottomans took the title of Kaiser Rum before they even took Constantinople. So there was a certain amount of connection about that. But yeah, in
Hmm.
terms of that, I argue that it was legitimate grounds to call himself the Emperor of the Romans. Daniel says no, and we can move on.
Yes. We will leave that debate for another time.
Yeah.
But
But anyhow,
I appreciate the question.
to Nazim Jassim, I recommend you watch Pre-Modernists video on that. So do you see any question? Any question you want to take?
Uh, hmm. How did?
So this is actually quite interesting. Do you want to talk about this?
Oh, why the Abbasid? I was looking at the question actually. Why the Abbasid caliphs made no response to retaking Crete and Tarsus after the Romans recaptured them is a very good question, and so you need to understand a little bit about um, when this took place, doesn't it? So, if I'm right in saying um, in the 10th century, the Abbasid Caliphate was in a state of decline, and so in if you read a history of this period, like Streams of Gold, Rivers of Blood by Anthony Caldelis, instead of talking about the Abbasid Caliphate, he instead is talking about the Emir of Tarsus and the Emir of Milytony, because these are really the people that the Romans are dealing with rather than the Caliph in Baghdad. Because by this point, his control is rapidly disintegrating. If I'm, please correct me on that one if I'm erring. But so you don't have the resources that the Islamic Caliphate can bring to bear on them now. The Romans have been trying for some time to reconquer Crete, and I don't think the Caliph cared too much about it, because the people actually on Crete weren't part of the Caliphate. They were the descendants of pirates that came from Spain.
Yeah.
So I like to call them Moors instead, because they come from a very different background to
But just to add there, not all of them were Moors, though. Not all of them came from Spain. There were a lot of Alexandrian pirates there as well.
Yeah, but they were a bunch of renegades, basically, or at least in descendants of them. And the reconquest of Crete had been attempted for quite a few times in the 10th century. You've got Leo VI who tried, and then Constantine the Seventh also tried. Both of them failed for different reasons. And then Constantine starts again, and it's brought to fruition by his son Romanus II, which is led by Nicephorus Phocas. So, and then they take Crete back. Tarsus is a different one. So it is part of the Caliphate, but again, the Caliphate only has so much control. And the Romans are really careful about how they do this. And this is something, again, I was talking about this with my university tutor at the time. And he was saying how something to remember is that the Byzantines were really cautious about kicking the hornet's nest, because if they conquered too much, they might get a big backlash and lose everything they've just taken. So even though they're going on the offensive in the 10th century, they are really careful, and it's very methodical what they do. So from the reign of Romanus I onwards, with John Corcoas, it's his campaigns in the east, and this is carried on by the Phocas clan. But the Byzantines sort of campaign year after year in the same area, and their objectives are capturing and destroying fortresses, killing soldiers, because most of this area is full of military colonies. So they're trying to kill off the manpower of the local area, capture and destroy fortresses, and basically make it completely untenable for these emirates to hold these places. And each city or area that the Byzantines conquer gets incorporated into their military machine. So like Milytony gets split up into a whole bunch of small themes with roughly like 200 soldiers in each one. And then so they can defend the territory they've conquered, and also those soldiers get used to conquer the next area. And also there's lots of Christians in this area, like Armenians and Syrians, who get incorporated back into the empire, as well as Arabs who convert. And there's a passage in Constantine VII where he talks about Arabs defecting and being incorporated into the empire. But it's slow, and it's done in a way that they take enough, but not too much to be like a big threat where the Islamic world has to respond. And I mean, this may be why when Michael Baltzes goes out on his own and captures Antioch, that he's in so much trouble, because Nicephorus II has told him not to do this. And so if you're thinking that this is a really important city and this could cause a big reaction from the Islamic world, and one of your generals has just done this without any orders to do so, then that would be really annoying. But fortunately, nothing came of it. But so yeah, I hope that answers your question.
So I would like to add to what you said about Tarsus. You mentioned that the Abbasid Caliphate was pretty much dead in the water at the time. I think Tarsus was taken in the 950s or 60s, right, by the Byzantine Empire. Um, by that time, but anyhow, after 902, when Al-Mu'tadid died, the Abbasid Caliphate essentially lost control of Syria and Egypt, and as a result, Tarsus was frankly too far from Baghdad at the time to try and take for the Byzantines. But there were local dynasties, for example, in Syria, that were somewhat interested in it. But then
Is
in
that
the
the Hammondids?
yeah,
Hammondids?
it
Yeah.
was the Safaddallah, I think, who took it or something. But then there was a problem to the south, in Egypt, when the Fatimids came around. Pretty much all of Islamic focus went to them, and Byzantine Empire was not as big of a threat as the Fatimids were at the time. So that's the reason that Muslims, the Abbasid Caliphate didn't. Well, actually, Abbasid Caliphate couldn't even take it. They didn't have the power, but for others, yeah. So, do you know anything about how Muslims lived in Byzantine Empire? Because I know only about merchants who lived in Constantinople, but were there Muslims living around like the frontiers?
With any legal status or discrimination. So, in law, as far as I'm aware, the Roman law is often very general and doesn't distinguish too much. And often when it does, it's to do with religious lines. So like there's also canon law, and this comes into a question of enforcement. But so like there's a canon which says that a Christian cannot marry a Muslim, but on the frontier, so like someone like Digenis Akrites is the son of a Christian woman and I think he's a convert Arab. So, but he was a Muslim, and so on the frontiers, there's a lot more sort of forgiveness for like you can't be too strict with the rules because one, it's harder to enforce. Two, the front line of the Byzantine Empire is in Constantinople, so it does depend where you are a little bit. In terms of discrimination, I mean, law, I don't think so.
What about in practice? Like
in practice? The trouble is the Byzantines were quite bigoted about everyone, basically, including their own people. So there's some hilarious lines about people from Cappadocia and Paphlagonia and parts of the empire. Basically, like anyone who's a provincial was a country idiot or something like that. So the Byzantines were, well, could be somewhat prejudiced against quite a lot of people. But at the same time, there's a lot of social mobility. So you do see people from foreign backgrounds who come into the empire, settle, and then end up quite high up on the food chain. It's like in the 12th century, you've got lots of Latins coming into the empire. You've got so like the Kuramites, you've got Theophobos, who's the son of a Kuramite, and they're from Azerbaijan, or is the leader of them. There's a bit of a dispute there. And then there's Manuel the Armenian, who was also a big figure, big general at that time. And he's one of Theophilus's big generals. So yes and no. It's like there's nothing actually there. It's not like a segregated system where it's like whites only or blacks only or anything like that. But you could probably expect that being Armenian, he would have some prejudice against him, but in a sort of private way, if you like. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I guess so. What do you know about the 20 Years Anarchy?
Well, one, it's one of the sort of parts of Byzantine history we don't have many sources for. So, but quite a lot happens. Well, one, there's 7 palace coups. So, like in our collaboration video, that's where all the different emperors come from. It's like Justinian is deposed by Leontius, and then Tiberius, and then Justinian comes back. It's the issue with this period is that with all of this political chaos, the Arabs are able to really push towards Constantinople, and some of the territories that the Romans have managed to take back in the 660s, 670s are lost. So, like, Armenia's lost, and they won't be back in Armenia for a couple of centuries as in actually owning territory there. The Africa, the province of North Africa is lost. So Carthage goes in 698. And well, and then that with another palace coup. So there's a big crisis of dynasty where you've had the Heraclians who've been in control of the empire for 80 years, and they've had 5 or 6 generations. And then suddenly they're gone, and then you've got all of these generals who end up thinking they can be emperor. And it's only when the enemy are at the gates that you finally stabilize their leadership. So it's a really big problem, and you've got this rapid turnover of emperors. And Justinian II's return is he's lost a lot of the resources he had. He's in terms of like commanders in general. So he's executed lots of the collaborators with the first 2 usurpers, and then a lot of people who are loyal and maybe not that useful, and some people who are useful and maybe not that loyal, and so he's trying to struggle with a very inexperienced officer corps, and he's trying to hold his empire together, and the pressure is starting to mount. And the Senate, who he managed to really annoy in the first reign by doing something, again, because the sources aren't very clear about this, we don't know, but he was clearly doing something to really annoy the Senate, who still had quite a lot of power at this point. And eventually, it's an odd one, because eventually he's not deposed by a massive army revolt, but by a guy in Crimea and the troops he sent to suppress him. And there's some sort of strange affair with the Khazars up there as well. So again, it's one of these weird episodes which, had things gone slightly differently, then maybe Justinian II's second reign may have gone much better. I personally think, as a ruler, he was much wiser in his second reign, but had few resources to deal with. And the situation had changed considerably in the 10 years he's out of power. And then you've got 6 years of an even more rapid turnover of emperors, where the front line basically collapses.
So from the Islamic perspective, the answer to this question would be, in general, the Abbasid Caliphate or other caliphates, I wouldn't say that they exploited problems when they occurred in the Byzantine Empire, other than raiding. For example, with Sicily, Muslims were much happier just raiding it. Same with Anatolia, Harun al-Rashid was very happy just raiding it, and because raiding it kept your army busy, it brought a little bit of money. You didn't have the hassle of trying to rule it. So, like for example, Muslims didn't try to take over Sicily; they just raided it until they were invited by that general Euphemius, I think his name was.
Yes, us
In,
in the 9th century.
yeah,
I
in
think this
20.
question's confusing the Umayyads with the Abbasids.
Yeah,
If it's 695 to
but
717.
with the Umayyads as well, I don't think that they ever exploited weaknesses like that. They just used it for raiding. They didn't use it to conquer Byzantine territory.
I think, just to adjust that slightly, until after the second siege, I think there is a real determination by the Umayyads to destroy the Eastern Roman Empire. And then after that, they're just raiding it for loot, slaves, etc. Maybe the odd fort here and there.
Yeah.
But until that point, it is much more a war of conquest.
So do you know anything about this, or should I just take this? Because it's I found the question really interesting.
I can add a note if that helps. I know very early on in the Caliphate's history, they had to rely on Greek and Syriac administrators because, well, the Arabs didn't have them to the same level and sophistication. But that's all I can add.
Yeah.
That's quite early on.
I mean, that's kind of the thing. The Umayyads were very Byzantine in their, well, not very Byzantine, but they were influenced certainly by the Byzantine Empire, and and a lot of their style of government was inherited by the Abbasids. So there was a bit of that as well, as well as some. And then with the Abbasids, the whole Persian thing came along. So I would say that by the Abbasid time, there was a little bit of Byzantine and a little bit of Sassanid, both in their style of governance. But with the Abbasids, it was more Persian than Roman. So yeah.
There's a fun little question here. Was there any bank robberies in Roman history, minus military siege plunders?
Was there?
There's what I can't say it's like specific bank robberies, but there's a fun couple of moments where, for the Byzantines, the annual pay for the armies going out to a theme, and then every so often the Arabs or Bulgars will jump it and then suddenly get like 90,000 solidi in their war chest.
I mean, that's more like military raiding, right? That's not.
Yeah, but it's like the your raid is the robbery of the theme's treasure chest. So it's the closest I can think of. But I thought I'd add that little one. But yeah.
Yeah.
I was. Hang on.
Do you want to talk about the siege of Constantinople? 717 one?
The second siege of Constantinople?
Yeah.
Well, what would you like to know about it?
So this person is asking how possible was it for the Arabs to win in the siege of Constantinople?
It should have been very likely. No, sorry. Let's try that again. It should have been very likely, but because they had a lot of troops involved. I mean, the figures we've got for it are like 100,000 men or something like that, and they were getting reinforcements as well. So, I think the Byzantines managed to use every trick in the book against them, and the Arabs also had a lot of bad luck as well. So, like during the winter, they've got one of the bitterest winters that for that period. So a lot of their troops end up freezing to death and eventually starving to death as well. I think one of the issues is because they brought so many men and animals and so on, they didn't have the logistics to keep up with it. And so one of the big things is that huge numbers of them die to starvation, and end up eating all of the pack animals as well. But also how they conduct the siege, and you may want to say, I mean, it may indicate that they had some inexperience of sieging something as formidable as
Yeah.
Constantinople, where they quite sensibly build 2 palisades to protect their front and rear, but because they're never able to get rid of either the Bulgar allies or make any headway in the siege itself, this almost becomes their own prison. And so whenever they send out foragers, they always get attacked and killed, which also means that they become so scared of doing so. So there's no food coming in locally, again, which helps cause this food crisis. And Leo III's ferry and his fire ships are able to destroy this big relief fleet which is sent. Again, a lot of bad luck because the ships are crewed by Christians from Africa and Egypt, and they just mutiny. They just join the Romans, and then they just burn all of the ships. So that doesn't help either. And I think there's another army that's sent overland, and that gets defeated as well. And Leo III uses some trickery to buy himself more time. Is it Marsalama who's in charge of the army? He gets hoodwinked by Leo III, thinking that he will take the city and then hand it over to him. And then the sources describe him as Marsalama as being totally trusting in Leo. And then when it becomes clear that Leo has tricked them, and a lot of the army loses confidence in Marsalama. So everything that could possibly have gone wrong did go wrong for the Arabs. And there's also not that much. I don't think there's any mention of the Arabs actually attempting to assault the city, or there's nothing in the sources that we have, like Theophanes or the Syriac chronicles, or the Arab histories.
I think the siege had much more chance. I don't know about what the situation of the Byzantines was at the time, but on the Islamic side, if the siege has taken place around 5 to 7 years earlier, it had a much better chance of being successful under Al Walid. I think of Suleiman as not that capable of a ruler, especially in terms of military affairs. Plus, the Umayyad war machine under Al Walid was much more powerful than it was under Suleiman. So I think that if Al Walid had done it, it could have been. It was more likely to be successful at the time. But I don't know what the situation was with the Byzantines at the time.
For the Byzantines themselves, they were very. This was a real threat, and they did think that Constantinople could be lost if there's a revolt during the siege in Sicily, where there's a rumor that Constantinople has fallen, and they proclaim an emperor to take over the western provinces, and Leo has to send a messenger to them to quash the revolt. So there is a genuine risk. But I do agree, if the siege had taken place and Philippicus was emperor, or because they hadn't got the Bulgar alliance yet, that was negotiated by Leo's predecessor, Theodosius, or I think the leadership of most of the 20 years anarchy emperors was competent, but except for Philippicus. But I think Leo III really trumps them all as being a really good leader. Plus, he had his ally in Anatolia, Artabasdos, who he was in. So Leo III was the commander of one of the big themes, Anatolacon, and his brother-in-law Artabasdos was in charge of one of the other big themes, Armeniacon. So he's
Mhm.
got his ally in Anatolia to stop rebellion there and keep things under wraps there, and he's also got this Bulgar alliance, and he's got his Greek fire ships, which um, scare the they're used and they scare the the Arab Navy into so much that they basically don't use their ships for most of the siege either.
Okay, there was a question about Al-Andalus. Yeah. What are the relations between Byzantines and Al-Andalusia? So I'll talk first from the Andalusian perspective. Uh, During the reign of, was it Al-Haq Abdurrahman II, and um, who was the guy who on the other side of the siege of Memorium? Who was that? Theophilos?
Oh yeah, the yes, there's a alliance between the Byzantine Empire and the Umayyads of Cordoba.
Was there an alliance? There was, from what I understand, there was just diplomatic relations, and Theophilos sent a ceiling. If you go to the Umayyad Mosque of Cordoba, the ceiling is still there. It was sent by Theophilos, I think, to Abdurrahman II. And the main point of the whole thing was that Abdur Rahman's father, Abdul Hakam, had expelled some rebels from Cordoba, and they had landed in Alexandria, where along with other Muslim pirates, they became pirates, and along with Alexandrian pirates, they attacked the Emirate of Crete, and they were raiding in the Adriatic and in the sea that touches the other side of Greece, between Greece and Turkey. What's it called?
The
Uh,
Aegean Sea.
Aegean, yes. So they were raiding there, and Theophilos reached out to Abdurrahman II, to if we would like to collaborate on destroying the pirates. So that's pretty much as far as I know. Do Daniel, what do you want to add to that?
Oh, this is actually quite personal because I'm researching uh, a video about Byzantine Sardinia, and this comes up because in the 9th century there's a spate of raids by the the Aghlabids in North Africa
Mhm.
and also
Right.
Cordoba,
They started conquest of Sicily, like in
Sicily.
807. They started
Yeah,
conquest of Sicily.
but there were also small raids against Sardinia, and one
Sorry,
of the
were those in the 800s? Because from what I understand, there were raids before 800, but then.
yes, well, there were both. There were raids in both the 8th and 9th century, but
Mhm.
after um, they stop from Spain because of this alliance, and also because the Aghlabids are busy with Sicily,
Mhm.
they stopped raiding Byzantine Sardinia.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and that alliance seems to hold for quite a long time. I
Yeah,
suppose.
I
Yes.
guess they didn't have too much to fight over.
Yeah,
They could just stay friends for a longer time.
I think it was an anti-Abbasid coalition, basically,
Mhm.
where because this is you also need to remember the caliphate has a lot of naval presence as well as presence on land. So um, the scope of the Byzantine world is not just Anatolia and the Balkans; it's also Italy and, uh, although probably more at the back of their mind, Sardinia as well and
Yeah.
Sicily. So
Yeah, from what I understand, when Muslims took Carthage and Tunisia, the Byzantine Empire was genuinely concerned that if Sicily falls, because Muslims were now regularly raiding Sicily, they were genuinely concerned that if Sicily falls, then Muslims could through the Adriatic and the Balkans just show up outside Constantinople, because that's how the Normans did it. So that was apparently, from what I understand, again, that was the reason behind the formation of the theme of Sicily in, what is it, 695, I think.
It is the late 7th century, probably late 7th, early 8th century
Around
for
that, in
Sicily.
690s or so.
Mm.
So yeah.
And part of this is, as you say, part of reorganizing the area after Carthage falls, because Carthage was, so like the island of Sardinia was part of the diocese of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, what the Muslims would later call Ifriqiya.
hmm.
But actually, I'm working on a video about not exactly about Sicily in that regard, but about um, Sicily as an Islamic island, because it has a lot of Islamic traditions. By the time, for example, Roger the Second commissioned a book from Al-Idrisi called the Book of Rogers. So it was quite fascinatingly like this collaboration, this sort of an island that was Christian and Muslim at the same time. So it's a very interesting time.
Hmm.
So anyhow, should we end the broadcast here? Because we've been on
An
like
hour and a quarter.
yeah, 16 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, we could keep going until the end of time, I suppose. But
Yeah. The
I
thing is,
think
it's
if we're
10.
going to stop, we should probably do it at some
Yeah,
point.
it's 10:39 here, and I woke up at 8 a.m. on a Sunday. So yeah,
Fair
um,
enough.
yeah. So I guess we should end this here. So thank you very much, Daniel, for joining me, and thank you very much to everybody who asked questions, and everybody who showed up. So yeah, or I'm just gonna end the conversation now. Bye.